Happy Father's Day, everyone! Welcome to a section of my backyard and our beautiful blueberries that keep us in fruit for a good quarter of the year. Today, I want to follow up in this first video about joy skills, returning to joy, specifically with ADHD and rejection sensitive dysphoria. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, then you need to go to YouTube, to EDS Advocate, my name, Rachel Lee Davis, and find the video Returning to Joy to hear about some of my past history of recovering from complex PTSD around sexual abuse and trauma. And there's not a lot of trigger warnings in that, but you can go find that video and watch to hear more about what I mean about joy skills. On our feed, we have a series right now for PTSD Awareness Month. If you go to the Facebook page, you can find a link to that video, as well as other topical things on somatic experiencing, polyvagal theory, and other trauma support and recovery tools. So today, I want to talk about a specific challenge to the process called returning to joy. And very briefly, that is where you are able to use rich and detailed appreciation of another person, words that notify, that notice their identity, spoken to them with texture and flavor, and it hopefully with eye contact, and you synchronize with them. It creates a reciprocal sense of a joy and safety with another person in this process, and creates what Dr. James Wilder calls a return to joy moment. And that is a calming of the sympathetic nervous system, a calming of various levels of threat response and stimuli that can be very common in PTSD, but also everyday life, people. So don't think that this isn't relevant just if, oh, I don't have PTSD, this isn't relevant. It is, because very, very often relationships in day-to-day life trigger our systems to shut down relational circuitry, and we begin to engage other people as threats or problems instead of people to be empathized with. So this is very, very effective and just an extremely necessary tool for society in general. But today, a specific aspect of that is what happens when you try to return to joy and it's coming up with a stack of life experiences that create a lot of distrust with the person that might be trying to appreciate you. And this happens in particular in ADHD with what's called rejection sensitive dysphoria. Lots of videos out about this as well. You can go to the website Additude for some excellent articles on RSD, and I'll refer to it as RSD going forward. So RSD is essentially that the brain in ADHD struggles quite profoundly to process even very healthy criticism or comments about things like doing the dishes, or how you look, or little comments that most people and most non-ADHD people, including autistic people, use all the time, that are not negative, that are not meant to impact a person's identity. They're just part of functional language. And what happens in RSD is that the ADHD person hears these things and the brain processes it with the same impact as though you're getting hit. That might seem like an over-exaggeration, but it's not. And I know this from a deep amount of personal experience. The sense of the RSD kicks in, and the other person communicating to you something like, hey, please put the bowls back over here instead of over here, or no, if you need to, this is a nice formal event, you need to wear something different. Things that you might just engage in teamwork activities as a couple. When someone has RSD, they hear all of those things and they feel like they're getting hit and punched, and then the brain begins to catastrophize them. It cannot stay grounded on its own. With training therapy, occupational therapy, specifically for this, it can. but most people don't get the chance to really go through that process during development. So they're wandering around as adults and reacting to things and projecting these reactions to things as though this is what's really happening. And it can be quite dramatic and overwhelming for people who are in relationships with them. But I want to emphasize their side of this today, and that's it's overwhelming for them. My daughter is ADHD, and while that has been well recognized as its own phenotype, the rejection sensitive dysphoria is much higher than for my son and I, who are just on the autism spectrum. And in working with her in the past few years, and I mean that in a very teamwork sense, because she puts in just as much effort in as we work together, one of the key things I noticed is that not only is it harder for her to feel appreciation when I give it, to feel that verbal bath of love and joy and delight, it's not only harder for her to feel it, it is harder for her to remember that it happened. And that is a particular feature of ADHD memory. And it inhibits relationship growth and maturity when joy skills are being used. You can use them all you want. You can try as hard as you can. But if the person with ADHD does not learn how to receive them and doesn't take steps to compensate for their memory, to remember that it happened, then they can often be completely overwhelmed by the fact that there's way more of this negative RSD response in their life than there is appreciation in their life, even to the point where they will be quite verbal to anyone who will listen that they're not appreciated. My wife doesn't appreciate me enough. My mother doesn't appreciate me enough. It's very close relationships. And it's challenging because that really is their experience. And there's only it just makes it extra challenging. So let's get into some practical tidbits for approaching this. In working with my daughter and seeing the challenge in memory and the challenge in experience, that challenged me to work on creating joy skills and sensory activities unique to her ADHD brain. And a wonderful occupational therapist worked with me on this a bit with her as well. And we just had a phenomenal time learning and growing and figuring some things out that have been wildly helpful for anyone else in life that I've ever had to either work with ADHD, with clients, with family members, random acquaintances. There's a place where when someone with ADHD finds out that you really can appreciate them in ways they can feel, it creates a very instantaneous connection. So let me talk for a second about the memory portion of this. So I mentioned that part of the issue with the joy skills, because part of it is joy memory work. If you see my video, the process of being guided or guiding yourself through a very sensory-rich memory of safety and letting your body feel the emotional response, the healthy, positive emotional response to that memory. And with ADHD, not only is memory different from the outset, but memory recall is drastically different. We could do a whole very, very long video on this, and some other people have done it way better. So if you'd like to learn more about ADHD and memory in ADHD with trauma, which I highly recommend that you do, go Google that, or ask the awesome AI tools to sort out through the massive pits of Google to find things quickly for you. So you don't have to do a whole lot of time on that, but do look at it. So in ADHD, the way that you process sensory information all around you, it doesn't go in the same way as for other people. The different focus of attention and executive function or dysfunction creates a part of that. But there's also different forms of memory. And like autistics were very good with more procedural memory and semantic memory. here's the words you said. This does not work or go well in ADHD relationships. There's all other video on marriage counseling components, because we remember, in autism, we remember a lot of structure, a lot of physical experiences through our bodies, a lot of specific semantics of what people said, and we anchor and we ground to those things as factual foundations. I'm imagining like concrete slabs with giant metal posts and concrete posts or wood just like sunk into them deeply and completely hardened. In autism, we have so many different emotional responses to things that we can use semantic facts to try to organize that and sort through it. Here's what was said. And we will bring up things that are said specifically to create an anchor point to then discuss the emotion. And that's really challenging in ADHD because they do not remember specific words that were said. You have ADHD, you need to learn this about yourself. You will feel like you do, but you don't. What you do remember, more often than not, and this is broad stroke stereotypes, okay, but what your memory is very good at is a more interpretive memory. If we're working with textual criticism in ancient languages, we call it hermeneutics. It's what is the meaning of this when we're analyzing this Babylonian tablet. What do they mean? Not just what the words were said. In modern parlance, we can use meaning as well. But what you remember is your impression of the meaning of what somebody said, which is remarkable. A lot of people don't really have strong sensory and detailed, even semantic memories of the meaning of another person. Or they don't need to. And so the ADHD, which is drawn to novelty, to challenge, to urgency, to passion and interests, those are the kinds of things that are involved in forming the memory to be stored. And the memories of events that happen are more likely to be stored long term. The episodes, so episodic memory, is more likely to be stored for someone with ADHD when they're in a state of hyperarousal. Okay? So, contrasting, autistics, a lot more semantic. We store so much of everything. We can use a very semantic, procedural form of memory with our body and the somatic parts of our memory to sort and organize the sheer quantity of information. ADHD, without effort, their natural form of memory does away with most of that. And they remember things that happened when their emotions were elevated. And that's not positive or negative, just elevated from baseline. When there's more arousal in the system, the memories are stronger and clearer and far more precise, even into the words, but still not as much. They can still really struggle to comprehend things semantically, and and so that will create issues and variations whenever there's an argument over something that happened. So that's how the memories get stored. And then on the recall side, you have a whole other process where when an ADHD person is recalling a memory, they're always reliving it. I would argue that that is actually the case for every human being. That's kind of how memory works, is you are reliving it. But take your experience, you non-ADHD people, of reliving a memory and just magnify that to the level of almost a PTSD flashback, truly. And let's make all of the memories you can remember states of hyperarousal. You were either really happy, feeling very pleased, feeling very well, or you were depressed, rejected, things were terrible, life was terrible. And those are most of what you remember all the time. I feel deeply. That's very, as an autistic person, that's very overwhelming to me, especially also having had a variety of different attachment pain and trauma over the course of my life. That's a lot. I know the experience of reliving things, and having to relive things so intimately and so deeply all the time feels exhausting, but it's not for an ADHD person, amazingly. Um, Most of the time it's not exhausting. It's just a lot of it's a lot of extra work. Their bodies can do it really well. If you're remembering something happy and positive, it's great. Okay, let's circle back to the RSD. That's the memory function that occurs at the same time in a person's body who also has rejection sensitive dysphoria, where even the small, reasonable, functional communications of the day can end up feeling like punches or slightly less than that, and lead your brain and your emotions to catastrophize, and you end up deciding that, well, my wife said this, and so our whole marriage is over. It's just done. I'm not loved. I'm not cared for. Or I saw a video the other day on YouTube where a girl with her husband was filming different episodes through the house of commenting on an outfit or commenting on dinner, and she was it was a little over dramatic. But having lived with an ADHD person who's been through trauma, nothing in that video was truly overdramatic. That is the case. Like, he would walk in and find her under the bed saying my life is over, or with a suitcase and packed and walking out the door like, you said this, and so you don't love me anymore, I'm leaving. And it was crazy to watch someone, random person on Facebook, doing things that I've lived through with an ADHD individual. And the profoundness of that in relationship to joy skills is not just painful and confusing for everyone involved, but it also means that the majority of those memories that are going to come up for you are not happy or good or joyful. The fact of RSD, particularly unmanaged, unsupported RSD, is that the individuals with ADHD, by the time they hit about 11 to 12 years old, have so much more negative experiences in day-to-day life than anyone else I've ever met. Every single day, they are battling and facing the sense of deep rejection. And without support and therapeutic support, what I like to call occupational support, usually that's like how to write or how to walk again, but emotional occupational support makes sense. And I know you guys get this, because you have to practice doing something different. And so with my daughter, as she was growing up, I was starting to see that even though we were having all of these very happy memories and joyful times, that whenever we would go into talking about memory or remembering them later, she would remember the bad things and the scary things. And that would be the chief thing in her mind. It could have been something that wasn't even more than 10 or 15 minutes of a single day 3 years ago, but that's what she remembered. Powerfully, strongly, viscerally. And she wouldn't remember appreciation that I had given, or appreciation her brother had given, or her dad. And it's first it broke my heart, and then I would, being an ass-B mom, I said, I got to figure out how to fix this, because this in a child is a recipe for an entire life of chronic, debilitating depression and anxiety. And many of you may already have thought of someone off the top of your head with ADHD or ADD who has lived a few years in life who also suffers from severe depression and depressive disorders and anxiety, and you already know who they are. And maybe they're you, and maybe you're hearing some of this for the first time. Our bodies are not designed to chronically remember pain. They do not survive. They do not hold up. And if there were no other medical conditions, if there was no other trauma involved, just the fact alone of ADHD, memory, and rejection-sensitive dysphoria is the perfect recipe for deep, deep struggles with depression and anxiety. And so I thought, all right, what if we could change that in development? What if we could be so intentional with my daughter about helping her remember, about body doubling her memory and our joyful appreciation of her so much that it can overwhelm all of the input of various rejection sensitivity dysphoria? And then 2, how can I teach her about RSD in such a way that we can then body double through that as well and reduce the amount of pain that gets encoded through using more joy skills? Because when you practice joy skills regularly, it grounds you. It gives you a very deep sense of compassion for other people where you can be with them in their pain without it changing and shifting who you are. And I thought, this is what my daughter needs. This is what people with ADHD need. Again, we all do, right? Every human being, but specifically this. And so when there would be rejection sensitivity, we've created a habit of stopping and pausing. And the thing with RSD is, I personally think it's absolutely terrible to just come out against the other person and say, you're wrong, you've got that wrong. Sometimes, especially with a child, sometimes with an adult, if there's awareness, there's trust, there's things, you can just point it out and say, honey, I think you processed that wrong. Could you please take a breath and try again? Yes, with a mature adult relationship where there are joy skills and where there is an ability to return to joy, that works. With a child, you cannot just step in and tell them that how they feel when they've just experienced something that has made them feel like sucker punched. You don't come in and tell them that's not what they felt. They're going to process that as gaslighting and manipulative. It's like, that's not what you felt. And interestingly, you'll also see this with adults that have had trauma in ADHD. So for a child, you absolutely can't start there. And for adults who have not, who don't have maturity around this issue, they can experience a lot of the same thing. They will feel like they are being manipulated because you're telling them that they should feel differently than what they do, which is also complicated. So with Gloria, we would go in and engage with, hey, I see your pain. I can tell that really hurt you. Can you tell? So the first thing I started doing was helping her to notice her own pain and not just dissociate from it. The second thing we would do after noticing the pain is I'd let her know that I was with her. Say, hey, I see you. I'm with you. You're not in trouble right now. Or anything else that could help to say I'm here. You're not alone. So introducing the body doubling. Okay? So noticing that the pain is happening instead of dissociating, and then introducing the body doubling. Okay? Then we can notice even more. What did you feel when your brother said this? Or when this kid you were playing with said this? What did you feel? And then more noticing deeper. But now it's not as scary because I'm with her. And we're connected. We have synchronized in her pain. And in all this talk of joy skills, you'd think that the focus is only on synchronizing with joy. It isn't. That's just what gives us the ability to synchronize in pain. It gives us a way to also recover from having to do this. So I synchronize with her in her pain and in her grief and in her anger, and can acknowledge the situation. And I promise you, there is always a reason. The rejection sensitive dysphoria is never completely delusional. Ever. There is always some root of real interaction. The challenge, though, is that sometimes that real interaction would, in any other case, be absolutely zero big deal. Like needing to send your spouse back to the grocery store because they forgot something. That communication should not be interpreted as, I'm going to leave you because you screwed up the grocery list. Okay? But is it possible that in the moment of feeling like, hey, I was tired, I did the grocery run, I did this, and then you're feeling bad that you forgot this one thing, and so then when your roommate or your brother or your spouse comes in and says, oh man, you forgot this, can you go back and get it? Wham, everything hits you. There's always a root that's very real. And so with a child, what I found is that you need to go find that root and acknowledge it. And then begin to walk them through very natural steps of emotional regulation, just like you do with someone who's autistic, just like all kids need, is us to body double in the emotions with them. And you go into this place with your child, and then you begin to say, okay, I'm going to have, in one scenario that happened, I brought her brother over and said, Samuel, when you said that, did you mean this? And I would articulate Gloria's pain, my daughter's pain, exactly how she had related to me. No changes, no diminishing, complete acknowledgement. Samuel, when you said this, did you mean to insult your sister? Did you mean to cause her pain? And then I let my son answer, no, of course not. No, I didn't. And I go to Gloria and say, Gloria, Sam is saying this isn't what he meant. And I heard him, and I agree. I don't think that is what he meant. Can you see that? I try to avoid anything that says she needs to discover this on her own, which takes some practice, but I try to avoid too much guidance in the space of telling her she's wrong and he was communicating XYZ, and more towards, this is what I heard too. Can you see, can you feel that it could have also been meant in this way? Okay, and that's the workaround. Rather than denying the emotion itself, I present the idea that there is another way to interpret the exact same scenario. Hey, this could have been meant that way, sure. But it really is more likely maybe to be this because of this and this and this. And we use that, which really helps with the autistic side of her, to work around and go, oh, yes, there are other options. Oh, those other options work much better. And then I thought I'm about the third or the fourth thing. The fourth thing I do is I go to my son and say, Sam, and say, my son, you've learned about RSD. So that's usually covered at this point, because I taught him about it too. We read the articles together. And so this is an RSD scenario. And it would be really wonderful right now if you could help Gloria return to joy. And I helped teach my son the same thing that I learned, which is that we can still return to joy with another person when they believe that, when they've had the feeling when they've had the experience that we hurt them somehow, even if they reframe, even though my daughter can reframe what she thinks and feels, it is still important to return to joy. And so my son can come over and say, Gloria, I'm so sorry, I did not mean to hurt you. I really appreciate. And then return to joy with her. It has been amazingly life-changing for all of us. And we're still working on it. We're still learning how to do this. But it works in our dynamic and in our home because there's a way to fundamentally change for her with the ADHD and RSD, how her body is storing memory. And it took time. I was under no illusions that this would take a couple of years because, again, with RSD, there is a huge amount of negative input that you can't control. It's just how you feel all the time in different situations. And so we were changing and shifting the memory itself in a different direction. And so her ability to remember joyful things improved because she was experiencing more joy in them. Again, ADHD memory, hyperarousal, but most of the arousal, most of the elevated emotions that were happening naturally were all negative. So by doing more of this, by acknowledging the negative emotions, by body doubling through them and redirecting it, we were able to begin inviting her to experience joyful interactions and joyful engagement more fully. That is key. Okay? You have to shift that part of your mind and your body or nothing else changes. There's just too much negative in your life. So you have to learn how to experience the joyful things just as fully as the negative ones. And a lot of people just don't want to do this. Especially when you kind of get older and really stuck in your ways. They don't want to. They feel threatened by what they feel threatened by. They feel rejected by what they feel rejected by. And don't you dare tell them any different. My heart breaks a lot of the times when I see that. That's got to be such a hard way to live and to relate to the world. It really does. That would be overwhelming. So this process, it's almost this very healing kind of therapeutic process for kids just by shifting the parenting and getting everybody in the house involved. Everybody else in the house has to feel involved, or the person with ADHD continues to feel a lot more negativity and will not be able to connect with the person who doesn't feel involved. And everybody else has to take a step back and really be able to see and notice that other person, to see that root that is true before the perceptions begin to get twisted. So what about adults? What about adults that are struggling with this? Well, what happens with adults is that they're not able to receive appreciation, and they're not able to remember that they have been appreciated for things. Also quite overwhelming and quite depressing. They're usually struggling with severe depression and anxiety disorders, possibly mood disorders as well by this point. Mood disorders, there's a challenge to be understood in a lot of them. Is it something you're born with? Or is it something you can acquire over time with trauma? And I think this really needs to be studied in ADHD specifically because it makes sense that a brain that is this sensitive, that uses memory in this way and other feelings in this way, would really be on this roller coaster of emotion so often that it would create negative patterns that the brain probably couldn't compensate for without medical intervention. And you also see that with the depression and anxiety. Same thing for a lot of us with autism, with chronic illness, that there is this point where there is a need for even pharmaceutical intervention because of the patterns our brains have learned for so long. And there really shouldn't be shame and stigma around that. But there also doesn't need to only be medication. There also doesn't only need to be a medical solution to a problem, because the relationship is still hurting and broken. The ability to return to joy is still drastically diminished. The Otsby sisters wrote an amazing book on memory, finding memory, and they talk about this in one chapter, and specifically that people with severe depression can visualize and recall their own future death in more detail than they can a happy or joyful experience. And that's really what started a lot of my thinking on this, and it comes to relating and connecting to things like joy skills and somatic experiencing, which is essentially returning to joy but through your body. Because if all you can remember with that vividness is something as painful as your own death, well, then no wonder death starts to feel like a real option to some people, maybe to you. And I don't say that lightly either. I have had one season of my life when I was still a teenager, dealing with memory recall and this unsupported autism that was just being misunderstood everywhere around me. But I was an adult, so I was expected to deal with it myself, having all these memories from sexual trauma and dysfunction, and became very, very, very depressed. And my body almost decided the fact before I did. I didn't have a conscious thought about it. It was just this feeling of life must be better somewhere else for me. And when you have so much negative thought in everyday life, that introduces the idea that moving on from this life is helpful. And the very, very sad reality is, and trigger warning for those with ADHD here, is that when you experience that much rejection sensitivity, and in your mind and in your body, you feel like everyone around you is doing it to you on purpose. They're not understanding enough, or they're hurting you on purpose. Or perhaps maybe you know that it's not them, and maybe you feel like it's you, but then you decide there's something wrong with you. So wrong with you that it would be better for them if you just weren't around anymore. Listen, that makes sense when you have spent so many years feeling that much pain and not being able to feel joy. And you do not have to keep living life like that. You do not have to keep living every day like that. And it isn't that simple. I know it's not that simple. It cannot, and it is not that simple. Who in your life can come to you in the rejection sensitivity? Who can you let in to acknowledge you, and then body double with you through the pain, and then begin to train yourself to think differently and to feel differently? And this is the really, really hard part. The really, really hard part, guys, is you have to start the process. There is not a way for other people in your life to just be more sensitive or more understanding. Your RSD is reacting to things it shouldn't be. You have to begin the process. And I have said the same thing to my autistic brothers and sisters who want to move on from the constant rejection and loneliness and start to heal from relational and social trauma. You have to take the first steps for you. Others, when we're dealing and recovering from various kinds of PTSD, you have to take the first step. You have to decide to begin to shift and change your body, your own body, and use the tools and use the resources. You have to decide. Other people who love you can meet you there. and be there for you. But if you do not fundamentally start to shift your understanding of how you process the world, no one else can make you return to joy. We can try as hard as we can, but you have to be the one to take the first step. I have to be the one to take the first step for my life. The process of being able to receive appreciation requires a very vulnerable trust from another person. And maybe right now you don't have someone in your life that you can do that with. But I promise they're out there. And if you feel better about yourself, you'll be more likely to find them and connect with them. And there is no shame if you do need medical help or support. I hope in this video that you've heard and seen enough to understand just how big this obstacle can be. It should not be underestimated. It should not be underappreciated by you, by anybody else. But it has to start with you. And then everyone else, if this is you and this is a loved one, a child, a spouse, another family member, a coworker, you can also take steps. They might not be able to see it or recognize it for what it is. Maybe not ever. But you can take steps to recognize their rejection-sensitive dysphoria. And listen, there isn't anything you can do differently or do better. You can try to change your tone of voice. You can try to change your words. But unless you basically just stop talking, there is no way to stop this spiral of rejection-sensitive dysphoria with serious depression. They have to be the ones to make a change. But what you can know is it's not your fault. You can know that while they might feel that significant level of pain from communicating with something you've said, you can acknowledge that without it changing you. Because if they gave you the chance, of course, like my son did, if you give them a chance, of course they would say, no, that's not what I meant. No, there's another way to view that. That's not the only way. I meant this over here. Once the person with ADHD begins that shift and change, then everyone else and all that work on it begins to go forward together on the same page. Because there is learning that has to happen. There are ways to be able to shift language and behavior. That's just personal preferences. That's preferences just like we have with all other sorts of things. Like my dog right now. She would prefer that I pay attention to her. That's not mean. And I might not be able to be the kind of dog that she wants. And so here is where we come back to the foundational need for joy skills. Because joy skills teach us compassion. Joy skills help us to stay grounded in ourselves and in our own identity so that we can do all of this hard work. So go out there and keep loving the people around you. If you need boundaries, create the boundaries. Don't ever stop learning. Don't ever stop growing. And stay tuned on the channel for more. We're going to keep going with PTSD awareness and trauma recovery. And I know this episode has been another tough one. But I hope also that you'll remember some of those resources I've been sharing on polyvagal systems, on somatic experiencing joy skills. There's so much out there, like the pollen in the air here, that's tickling my nose this whole time. There's so much out there for us to begin to get help and to help ourselves. And there's people. There are good people that can love you. Ellie, come. You barking at the wind? Come say hi. Come say hi. Come say hi. Here's the Ellie. Here's the Ellie. Here's the emotional support mascot of the month. Say bye-bye, Ellie. Good girl. Stay tuned for more and share this with someone who needs it.